Mr. Brandt, thank you very much for coming to Voice of America today. Your company, ConturGlobal, just signed an agreement over $180 million for Armenia's largest hydroelectric cascade, that is the Vorotan in the south. If you don't mind, talk a little bit about the general agreement and what are the main obligations that your company and the Republic of Armenia have based on this agreement.
Sure. We acquired or announced the acquisition of the 405 megawatt Vorotan cascade for about $180 million in acquisition price, and then a commitment to invest another 60 to 70 million US dollars to rehabilitate the three facilities. There are three facilities in the cascade. One of them is in fairly good condition. The other two are not in very good condition, and they date back to, in one case, the 1970s, with construction really beginning in early 1960s. The most recent is in the 1980s, and so part of this transaction is really about acquiring and then using the expertise and management capability to rehabilitate and extend the lives of these hydroelectric plants.
So over the next couple of years, you mentioned $60 to $70 million. Is this investment going to go in the rehabilitation, physical
Exactly.
rehabilitation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we'll be investing in repairing things like the turbines, upgrading the control systems, installing the type of control and IT systems that you would find in a modern hydroelectric plant in a more developed region. And so the most of the investment is around literally fixing the things that are broken and then upgrading to more developed world standards those aspects of the power plants that are not in the condition that they would normally be operating in the West.
Now, based on your knowledge or research, is there going to be a more power coming out of the cascade after the rehabilitation?
Yeah, we expect that the rehabilitation will be focused on two things. We think we'll get excess energy production, so we'll be able to optimize the way the water flows and the way the output is managed, so that we'll increase production over the 405 megawatts. But the primary reason for the investment is really to make them both more efficient and also to extend the life of these facilities.
Now, what is going to be your main market? Who are you going to sell electricity?
Right. So all of the electricity will be sold under a long-term power purchase agreement with the single buyer. It's called AEN, and it's the entity that, under the Armenian electricity structure, acquires all electricity in the market from all producers of electricity.
There were speculations in the Armenian media about the bidding process. Were you comfortable with this bidding process? There were talks about making a deal behind closed doors rather than a more transparent bidding process.
So the government decided to sell this complex in a negotiated transaction, as they've done several times in the past with other parts of the electricity system. It was a process that we became comfortable with. It was transparent. It was authorized under Armenian law. We worked closely with many of the multilateral development agencies, such as the IFC. We corresponded and spoke with the IMF. We had a large U.S. government involvement, both through the State Department and also the United States Overseas Private Investment Corporation, who we expect to work with us to finance the facility. And so we were comfortable that this was an appropriate way to sell the business, and it was done in a transparent way.
Were there any other bidders? Were there any other company participating in the bidding?
Our understanding is that the government has tried for several years to sell the complex to other owners of electricity assets, including companies that currently own assets within Armenia, and they were either unable to agree on the price or unable to agree on the terms. And so when we became involved, it was after several attempts to sell and find the right type of rehabilitation commitment that they needed to make these assets operable more in a more developed way. There had been previous activities with the German Development Bank to provide a rehabilitation loan for these facilities. The expectation was that that loan would be available if they were able to sell to a qualified operator of the plants, and we understand the government tried to do that for several years but was unable to either find a qualified operator or find the right type investor. And so the way we viewed this transaction is, even though it wasn't a tender where other entities were participating at the same time, that well before we became involved, there were several companies that were approached and had an opportunity to buy, and the transaction never occurred.
You talked about the investment climate and your research with the international organizations in the country. Do you feel comfortable with the current administration in Armenia? Do you see this investment as reliable and long-term?
Yeah, well, we obviously are a long-term investor when we invest in power stations, and we're focused mostly on the emerging markets. So we are both developing new power plants and then acquiring and investing in and operating power plants. And given the markets that we're in, we're always thinking about political risk and stability and the embrace of market mechanisms and whether or not this will be a long-term investment, because our investment time horizon is decades, not short periods of time. We do a lot of work in this area. We caucus with as many different people as we can, including the government officials and our government in the United States and the European governments and the multilaterals, the IMF, et cetera. And we became comfortable that the country has moved along a path in the last decade towards more economic openness, that they have experience with Western investment, and so they understand the requirements for fully transparent investment and operations. The central bank is very focused on the ability of investors to be able to repatriate funds for interest payments, principal payments, dividends, et cetera. And so we were comfortable that this was a country where we would be well invested and would have a long relationship. We were also impressed with the quality of the ministers who we came into contact with, particularly the finance ministry and also the energy minister.
Speaking about ministers, there were also news or speculations again in the media that some of the officials have vested interests in this. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, it's not true. Secondly, it's inconceivable for us to be involved in a transaction or an investment in a country where there are state officials or government officials who are somehow involved in the transaction or benefiting in a personal way from the transaction. It's simply not true. As with most countries, there's always a political opposition, and the political opposition will throw all sorts of allegations, true or untrue, on the wall to see, if they can discredit what the current government is doing. But this is simply false, and it's inconceivable for a company like ours to be involved in a transaction like that.
The biggest owner of Armenia's energy market is Russia.
Correct.
Can there be conflicts, do you think, in the next couple of years, especially considering Armenia joining possibly in the prospect this customs union, which may change the country's economic development or the path?
Yeah, we don't see the possibility for conflict. We sell to the sole buyer, the single buyer in the market, that's owned by a Russian company. The Russians are, as you said, the biggest investor in the market. The Vorotan complex is critical for the country. It produces about 20% of the total electricity in the system, and it's even more important in terms of its production for stabilizing the grid and supplying the southern part of the country. And so we don't see any basis for conflict with other Russian interests or investors in the electricity sector, and feel that we'll have a good partner in terms of a buyer of our electricity in AEN, which is the Russian-owned grid company.
The capacity, human capacity, do you have enough specialists in the country locally, or will you have to involve other experts?
We'll have to do two things. We have right now approximately 150 employees inside the company in Vorotan. Once we start the rehabilitation, that will approximately double. So we'll have roughly 300 employees. We'll need to use, and we'll certainly tap out all the specialist capability within the company and probably within the country in the area of rehabilitation of hydroelectric facilities. And we'll also then need to both find external support, and some of that will come obviously from our own company. But we'll also need to bring in the training capability to upgrade the capabilities and the skills of the people in the plant. And this is really part of our mission as a development company and as a power company focused on underserved areas in the developing world. And so we feel comfortable from our past experiences that we'll be able to raise the skill set of the employees that we inherit as part of the acquisition.
Well, you spoke about your end of the deal. What are the responsibilities of the government of Armenia or the Republic of Armenia?
So the Republic of Armenia will obviously make available to us the ability to invest in the country. They'll issue licenses that will let us operate these generating facilities. They'll facilitate the power purchase agreement that we sign with AEN, and generally then permit us to have an investment in the country in a way that we can use Western financing related to the asset. And so that will mean that we have to have security of the ability to convert currency to make interest and principal payments to OPIC, who we expect to be our lender, and to just have the ability to repatriate capital generally when required.
So no financial obligations from the side of the Republic of Armenia?
No, the government is not paying for or financing or in any way providing financing for the project. That will come from our own resources. I suspect will involve some of the Armenian banks as well in financing of the project. And then we expect the primary lender to be the United States Overseas Private Investment Corporation, with whom we've worked with in several markets to develop much needed long-term infrastructure for countries. At the same time, IFC of the World Bank has actually posted yesterday on their disclosure site that they're looking to make an investment alongside us as a 20% equity investor in the project. And so, we look forward to working hopefully with them as well.
Is that a government loan or?
No, it's an equity investment.
Equity.
So it's the IFC of the World Bank Group, and they make equity investments in projects in those parts of the world that they're designed and intended to support. They've partnered with us in a power project that we developed in a country in sub-Saharan Africa as a 20% investor, and they're looking to do the same thing here in Armenia.
So Brandt, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming to Voice of America, and we wish you luck.
You're welcome. Thank you.